285 Badger Avenue, Clinton Hill, Newark, New Jersey. In 1941, Forrest Mars Sr. chose that address for his first factory, a company he called M&M Limited. Today, it's a vacant lot. The building came down at some point in the decades after the company moved out, and nothing replaced it. The surrounding neighborhood, Lower Clinton Hill, has the highest concentration of vacant land and empty buildings in Newark. There are clusters of older homes, some commercial activity along Avon Avenue, and otherwise mostly cleared ground. The block where M&Ms were invented fits in with the area around it. The candy went a different direction. Newark in 1941 was still a major industrial city. Its factories produced chemicals, clothing, and processed food for national markets, and Clinton Hill had available industrial space within reach of freight rail. Forrest Mars Sr., son of Franklin Clarence Mars, the man who had built the Mars confectionery business in the United States, was working from a fresh patent and limited startup capital, and needed somewhere to put a production line. Newark had the space and the labor. He chose Badger Avenue. The idea for the product hadn't come from New Jersey. Mars had first encountered it in the 1930s while he was in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. He was watching soldiers eat a British confection made by a company called Rowntree's. Rowntree's Smarties were small chocolate centers coated in a hard panned sugar shell, and that shell kept the chocolate from melting in warm conditions. A chocolate bar in a tropical climate was often unusable within a few hours of being issued. The Smarties format didn't have that problem. Mars came back to the United States with the design, adapted the manufacturing process, and filed for an American patent on March 3, 1941, U.S. Patent 2,237,717. The patent was granted. Production began in Newark that same year. George Harris, who ran Rowntree's at the time, chose not to pursue a legal challenge. The Nestle archives, which hold the Rowntree's records following Nestle's acquisition of that company decades later, note simply that Harris didn't attempt to sue. They don't explain the decision. The design Mars developed was different enough from the Rowntree's process that a suit may not have had clear merit, and it's also possible Harris didn't anticipate how large the American market for this kind of product would become. Either way, he let it go. The first version of the candy came in a cardboard tube, similar to the Rowntree's Smarties format. The colors were red, yellow, brown, green, and violet. There was no letter stamped on the candy itself in those early years. The M imprint that now identifies every piece wasn't introduced until 1950, 9 years after production began. For nearly a decade, M&Ms were colored chocolate pellets in a tube with no mark on them at all. The name required a business arrangement that it doesn't obviously communicate. Both letters represent surnames. The first is Mars. The second belongs to Bruce Murray, whose father, William F. R. Murray, was the president of the Hershey Chocolate Company, the enterprise that Milton Hershey had founded and grown into an American institution. William Murray had led Hershey since 1910 and had overseen its growth into one of the largest chocolate manufacturers in the United States. His son Bruce entered M&M Limited as a 20% owner from the beginning. The reason was wartime rationing. The United States government controlled the supply of cocoa and sugar during the Second World War, implementing rationing programs that gave priority access to established manufacturers with existing government contracts, which meant Hershey held priority access to rationed chocolate because of its existing contracts and production capacity. Forrest Mars needed that chocolate, and getting it required a relationship with the company. A 20% stake for the president's son established that relationship. The second M in the name was a condition of production, not a reflection of partnership in any broader sense. This arrangement also explains who bought the candy first. The United States Army was M&M Limited's first customer. The military's problem with chocolate was long-standing. It melted. Standard chocolate bars became unusable within hours in tropical conditions, and American forces would operate across tropical and subtropical theaters throughout the war. A field ration item that couldn't survive the Pacific climate was of limited practical value. M&Ms solved that. The hard shell held in conditions that would ruin ordinary chocolate, and the candy was compact and durable enough to pack into rations without special handling. The Army placed orders. For the entire duration of the Second World War, M&Ms weren't available to the American civilian public at all. The candy that several generations would later associate with vending machines and holiday seasons spent its first years as a military supply item. Civilians couldn't buy it. The demand from the Army outgrew the Badger Avenue building, which meant the company moved its operations to a larger facility at 200 North 12th Street, also in Newark. Production stayed there through the remainder of the war. The war ended in 1945. The civilian market opened, and M&M Limited moved quickly into retail distribution. In 1949, the company introduced the tagline that would become one of the most recognized phrases in American advertising. "The milk chocolate melts in your mouth, not in your hand." The slogan described exactly what the hard shell had been doing for the Army for 8 years. Peanut M&Ms followed in 1954, extending the product line that had begun with a single candy in a cardboard tube. Also in 1949, Bruce Murray sold his 20% stake back to Forrest Mars. The wartime rationing of cocoa and sugar that had made the Hershey partnership necessary was gone, and Hershey no longer held the structural advantage over chocolate supply that it had during the war. Whatever else shaped the transaction, the historical record is thin on specifics. The Murray family's involvement ended there, quietly. After 1949, the second letter in the name was simply part of a name. The following year, the Black M stamp was introduced on each candy. The candy had been in production for 9 years before anyone put a letter on it. The Badger Avenue factory site didn't become anything else. There's no clear record of when the building at 285 Badger Avenue was demolished, or what occupied it in the years between M&M Limited's departure and the lot being cleared. A Newark historian named Nat Bodian wrote about the address in 1981, describing what had been made there and why the location mattered to the city's history. That piece is the primary source for this part of the story. The Wikipedia entry for Clinton Hill, Newark, references it in a single line, noting that the first M&M's factory stood at that address and that the site is now a vacant lot. There's nothing else to find. Clinton Hill lost population steadily through the second half of the 20th century as Newark's industrial base contracted and residents relocated to surrounding suburbs. Urban renewal programs cleared land, some of which was never rebuilt. The neighborhood has transit access and proximity to the city center, which makes it a recurring candidate in redevelopment planning, though the investment that would make those plans real has been slow to arrive, and hasn't arrived at the scale the plans have called for across several different planning cycles over several decades. The vacant lots are the result of a long sequence of decisions by companies, governments, and individual people over many years, most of which had nothing specifically to do with M&Ms. The Badger Avenue lot is one instance of that larger condition. Newark's relationship to manufacturing has changed since 1941. The city remains a significant logistics hub, with port infrastructure and freight connections, and it has attracted investment in healthcare and education in recent decades. The factory economy that defined neighborhoods like Clinton Hill through the first half of the 20th century didn't survive in the form it had taken. Mars Incorporated kept growing on a different trajectory. The company acquired the Wrigley Company in 2008. Wrigley had been headquartered in Chicago since the 1880s, and the acquisition gave Mars a substantial Chicago presence and integrated a large American snack food operation into the company's structure. Mars Snacking, the division that manages M&Ms and related products for the North American market, began orienting more of its operations toward Chicago in the years that followed. Investment followed investment. In 2025, Mars completed the acquisition of Kellanova, a snack food company spun off from Kellogg the previous year. Kellanova was Chicago-based, and its portfolio included Pringles, Cheez-It, Pop-Tarts, and a range of other brands. Mars invested $100 million expanding its Chicago facilities to absorb the acquisition, and Chicago became the formal global headquarters for Mars Snacking. The Newark office, which had served as a regional headquarters for the snacking division in the North American market, no longer had a distinct operational function. On July 18, 2026, and as of this recording the timeline is unfolding, Mars Wrigley submitted a notice under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act to the state of New Jersey. The law requires employers with more than 100 workers to give 60 days advance notice before a mass layoff or facility closure. Under it, Mars Wrigley disclosed that 307 positions at the Newark headquarters would be eliminated by mid-October of 2026. Mars itself described the closure as sunsetting the Newark market hub by December of 2027, consistent with a previously communicated transition to Chicago, and characterized it as part of a broader strategy for long-term growth. The manufacturing facility in Hackettstown, which has been running since 1958 and produces roughly half of all M&Ms sold in the United States, wasn't part of the fillings. The Hackettstown plant is in Warren County, about 60 miles west of Newark. When M&M Limited moved production there in 1958, it was leaving Newark for the second time, having already relocated once from Badger Avenue to 12th Street within the city. Hackettstown was the third New Jersey address the operation had occupied, and it's been running there for nearly 70 years, longer than the Newark factories ever did. The New Jersey Business and Industry Association responded to the filing on the day it became public. Its chief executive noted that the state had already lost more than 9,700 jobs through WARN Act notices in 2026 as of the Mars announcement, and that the filing was consistent with a broader pattern. Samsung had announced in June of 2026 that it was relocating its American corporate headquarters from Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, to Texas. ExxonMobil shareholders had voted to change the company's state of incorporation away from New Jersey, where the company and its predecessors had been domiciled for 144 years, beginning as Standard Oil of New Jersey, the company from which ExxonMobil's entire corporate lineage descends. The association described the situation as a disturbing trend and asked state officials to act. The reasons each company gave for leaving are different. Mars followed a Chicago investment pattern that had been building since 2008. Samsung and ExxonMobil had separate calculations. They don't share a cause, but they share a direction. The 307 people whose jobs are ending in Newark this fall weren't working in Clinton Hill. The current office is in a different part of the city, several miles from the original address. 285 Badger Avenue has been a vacant lot for longer than most of them have been working there. New Jersey will keep making M&Ms. The Hackettstown plant will handle that, as it has for nearly 70 years. What New Jersey won't have is the corporate presence that existed before the filing, and what Newark won't have is what it had in 1941, when a company called M&M Limited, founded by Forrest Mars Sr., backed by a Hershey partnership, built on a patent numbered 2,237,717, moved into a factory on Badger Avenue with a fresh patent, an Army contract, and a business partner named Murray, whose stake in the whole thing lasted 8 years. The letter for his name has been on the candy for 75 years since he sold it. George Harris never sued.